Welcome everyone to the New Bedford Science Cafe's March event. And we start these science cafes with, can up, wine up. Here's to everyone's health. Cheers for the first of spring. I'm having a Shoveltown Brewery Flyaway. I keep having Flyaway. I think that's because I want to fly away. Alan, what have you got down there in Costa Rica? Oh, you have to turn can't hear you.
I'm having diluted orange juice. I'm presenting tonight.
Nathan?
I'm having a switchback IPA from Vermont.
Okay, great. Anyways, here's to everyone's health. Thank you for joining us for this. Really looking forward to our guest, Alan Poole. I wanted to extend a warm welcome to Alan for joining us, though it occurs to me that he should be extending some warmth to us because there's at least, 50 or 60-degree difference. He is joining us from a research station in the southern highlands of Costa Rica, which is prime Quetzal habitat, perfect for his discussion, the resplendent Quetzal birds as barometers of land use in Central America. A few things. I want to thank the New Bedford Whaling Museum for its partnership and providing us with its Zoom webinar program for these virtual events. It makes a huge difference for us. I especially want to thank Jocelyn Nuns. Jocelyn, she's the museum's queen of Zoom. She is always so helpful and keeps the stream on track. So our format is our guest, Alan, will talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we open to a Q&A. We encourage you to ask questions via your chat button at the bottom. Nathan Ricard, biologist, Nathan is going to be moderating questions, and I'm sort of putting him on the spot. I'd like Nathan to tell us a little bit what he's been up to the last year, because it's quite something. Nathan?
Hey, good evening, everyone. So my name is Nathan Duclos-Rickard. I'm in my second year of teaching biology over at New Bedford High School. So I teach biology to English language learners, and I teach it in a sheltered English format. So I present all of my material and as much as I can in English. The students that I teach, they have to take a test every year that measures their English proficiencies, and you scored a 1, meaning you have no English, 6, meaning you can now leave that sheltered English program. Majority of my students are under a 2. So that in itself is a challenge, but now we throw in COVID-19, we throw in the technology component. A lot of my students have never used a laptop before. So it's interesting trying to go through teaching not only science, but technology. How do you save a file? How do you access your work online now? One of the biggest challenges this year is transitioning from science, biology. It's more fun when it's hands-on, when you can do labs, you can do experiments, you can manipulate models. So this year it's the challenge of trying to find that in an online format so that I can serve both my kids who are in school right now and then those who are learning remotely at home. So the biggest thing that I've done this year is take those little moments where we have a breakthrough, we have something awesome happen, hold on to those moments. And that definitely helps get you through the long weeks. So, but it's a challenge. We're all in it together, and it's a good thing to see that, hey, we're all here tonight. Science everywhere, it's outside of the classroom, and that's one of the things that we're showing our kids this year. So it's all around us.
Here's to you for all of that. That really is challenging, and your students are probably doing fine because of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm just going to give a short intro. Alan Poole was the editor of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Birds of North America Life History series for 22 years. In addition, he is a leading osprey authority. I sometimes call him Alan Osprey. Sorry to embarrass you, but he knows a lot about ospreys, has written 2 books. One of them, Ospreys, the Revival of the Global Raptor, about the status of ospreys worldwide, came out not that long ago. When did that come out, Alan?
It came out 2 years ago.
Okay. Anyways, he has played an instrumental role bringing ospreys back, so to speak. He's a resident of Dartmouth in conjunction with Gina Pertel, who's director of Mass Audubon South Coast Sanctuaries. He has helped create a thriving osprey population hereabouts. Mind you, I have to mention this briefly. Anyways, Alan is joining us from the Las Cruces Research Station in southern highlands of Costa Rica, where this winter he has been researching and writing his next book, which is the story of the resplendent Quetzal. So on to you, Alan. Thank you for joining us.
Terrific, Ann. Thank you. And thanks to all of you who are here tonight. I want to take this opportunity to introduce to you, first of all, thank Ann for the Science Cafe, Ann and her crew for getting the Science Cafe rolling. I think it's a tremendous new piece of information for our community. It is great to be here with all of you, my friends, my neighbors, some of you I don't know. As we say here in Costa Rica, mucho gusto. For me, it's a great pleasure to also to introduce you tonight an extraordinary bird of the highlands of central Mexico and Central America, the resplendent Quetzal. There are 5 or 6 Quetzals in Latin America, depending on who you talk to. But tonight our focus is going to be on the resplendent, and it's a bird that truly earns its name. As you can see here, this is a bird that has popped out of, looks as if it's popped out of the pages of Dr. Seuss. This is an extraordinary bird for a whole variety of reasons, but particularly because of its evolutionary history. This is a bird that evolution has pushed to extremes for a variety of reasons, but particularly extreme in its plumage. You see the male on the left-hand side here, the female on the right. And a lot of that exuberance in male plumage is being driven by those females. In fact, that female eye is what has been choosing male plumage over millions of years and been driving these male resplendent Quetzals to the extraordinary lengths that they've gone to in their plumage. A tail that's almost 1 meter long, a crest that looks like a punk rocker's mohawk haircut, extraordinary colors, as you can see here, and an interesting life living in these rainforests. That branch that they're perched on there is very typical of the kind of habitat they live in day to day. But this is a bird that is also extraordinary for other reasons as well. It's extraordinary for the hold that it has on the human imagination and the hold that it's had for thousands of years. This was the sacred bird of the Aztecs and the Mayans, going back actually pre-Mayan, back to the Olmecs 3,000 years ago. You'll find paintings of this Quetzal on the walls of Mayan palaces. There are Aztec headdresses for the king that are made entirely out of the tail feathers of these male birds. There was a robust trade in Quetzal feathers. It was really the feathers that the Aztecs worshipped rather than the bird itself. They lived in a part of Mexico where this bird did not exist. So the feathers were brought to them and they were worth more than gold. And what's happened over time is as we have come into the picture, the Quetzal has captured our imagination as well. This is a bird that bird watchers most want to see when they come to Latin America. And as a result, it's become a barometer of the health of the forests that it's lived in, not just its status and its breeding success, but when the shoe's on the other foot, it has made us focus on the forests that support it in ways that few other birds have been able to do. And that's really my story tonight. I'm really focused. I want you to begin to appreciate how this bird shines a spotlight on what's going on with forests in Mexico and Central America today. And believe me, these are forests that are under siege. There are areas where they're still doing well, but most of them are having real problems keeping going. So they need all the help they can get, and quetzals are providing a surprising amount. But let's start with geology. This is the geography of resplendent quetzals and their breeding range. As a matter of fact, they don't move around much, so this is they're pretty much their full-time range. You can see they move from they are found from the mountains of southern Mexico, from Chiapas, Mexico, all the way down into Panama, with two discrete populations. There's a northern one here, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, and then a southern one in Costa Rica and Panama. Probably two different species at this point, considered one, but in any case, very similar. And the important thing to realize here is these are birds of highland forests. They are not found in the steamy lowland forests that are down around sea level. These are birds that are up around 6,000 or 8,000 feet. And so when we talk about land use, we really need to think about how highlands are different than lowland agriculture. Here you see a typical field in southern Costa Rica. This is a pineapple field, Del Monte pineapple. It could easily be oil palm. A lot of lowland Latin America is turned over to agriculture like this. Big, huge industrial, often owned by companies outside of the country where they're in. Heavy use on fertilizers and pesticides, and the whole different suite of problems. The thing to realize is quetzals have never lived in country like this. They are up in the tops of these mountains that you see in the background. And the farming that's going on up in those highlands is entirely different. It is mom and pop kind of farming. It tends to be small, semi-subsistence, clearing, usually slash and burn with small plots. A farmer might have an acre or two or three if they were lucky, and usually a large family that goes along with it that helps them work these lands. But if we back up into other parts of these highlands, we find that there are a few areas that are in preserved land, in parkland, that haven't been settled by humans at all. And this is really the stronghold of the quetzal in Central America. You're looking at here one of the great national parks of Costa Rica. This is Amistad National Park. It's almost 1 million hectares. It's a huge, huge area, intact forest, and there are thousands and thousands of quetzals that are nesting in this highland area, and they're in pretty good shape. These clod forests are extraordinary in their biodiversity. They have a tremendous range of animals living in them. They are complex ecosystems. Among other things, they are extremely good at wringing moisture out of the atmosphere. They are either in mist or cloud at least half the time. During the rainy season, they get drenched in rain. Only in the dry season do you begin to get clear days. And even then, you'll often get clouds moving in by the afternoon. One thing to keep in mind here is what these forests are able to bring to the surrounding areas. These are a vital source of water for lowland agriculture and for industry. In the jargon of ecology, this is known as ecosystem services. But in a lot of ways, I don't think that does this justice. These are small little ecosystems in their own way. They have their own suite of birds and animals. There are trout in some of these waters. You know, they are so lovely and so clear and so pristine. If we were ancient Greeks and living by these rivers, we would have a goddess that would be part of them. Speaking of gods and goddesses, here we are back in Quetzal land and thinking about what forests are bringing to quetzals and why the quetzals are there. One of the key, quetzals really just need two things to carry on their lives. They need holes for nesting and they need food. Let's start with the holes. They use old woodpecker holes in dead trees, which they are able to expand, clean out. They use their bills to dig them out. These are trees that are almost falling over. They have to be at just the right stage of rot. So not any dead tree will do. It has to have just the right characteristics. The males take part in breeding, which is unusual for a bird that's this flamboyant. In most of the bird world, when you have a male that looks like this, he only does one thing, and that's inseminate females. These guys are different. They actually take a critical role in raising and taking care of eggs and young. And it seems almost comical that they are sporting this incredible plumage to impress females, and then they turn into householders and come in and out of these holes in dead trees. The tail is so long that they're kind of like a train. The front of the Quetzal, the front of the Quetzal goes in, the tail is still coming in behind it, and when it turns around to pop its head out, the tail is still trailing behind it. Kind of like being on one of those long trains and going around a steep curve, and you look out the window and the caboose is coming around beside you. This is what keeps Quetzals going. And keep in mind that the highland forest that they're living in, the climate is a challenging one. It's wet, it's cold, it can be 40 degrees at night. These birds need a food source that provides a lot of fat. And guess what? They've got it in spades in these forests. These are wild avocados, known locally as aguacatillos. They're in the Lauraceae family, the same family that provides the bay leaves that are on your kitchen shelf. There's a huge suite of these trees. There are probably 60, there are 60, 80 species of these trees throughout Costa Rica alone. So a huge proliferation. And it is this food that makes it all possible for our resplendent Quetzals. These avocados are about the size of your fingernail. The different varieties, different sizes, but roughly that size. They swallow them whole. They can only fit 2 or 3 down their gullet. There's only room for 2 or 3 in their esophagus, in their stomach. Think about if you were living on whole avocados, you'd be swallowing them whole. Needless to say, it would be a challenge. It is for Quetzals too, except they have 1 million years of evolution of dealing with this diet, and they've gotten really good at handling these fruits. And what they do is they fly out and pick off in their bills, in hover flight, they pick off 2 or 3 of these and bring them back to the perch one at a time, and swallow them. And then basically they sit there for another half an hour or 45 minutes. And then eventually, having digested the flesh of the fruit, they regurgitate the seed. And because they're moving around, they are regurgitating the seeds in different parts of the forest. And like so many other fruit-eating birds in the tropics, Quetzals are just one. Like so many other fruit-eating birds, these are the birds that keep the forest planted. These are the birds that keep these forests going. Every new tree, every new Lauraceae, every new aguacatillo is coming out of the gullet of a Quetzal or some other bird that eats them, perhaps also a mammal that swallows them and it goes through their digestive tract. So it's a give and take here, and it's not just a one-way street. Interesting to think of what else is in these hugely rich forests. Snakes, of course, but keep in mind for every snake there has to be at least 30 or 40 different insects that it's feeding on, 30 or 40 different reptiles or amphibians, a whole suite of different birds whose eggs and young, whose nests it can get to eat the eggs and young. Big cats are part of this forest. Here's a jaguar. Believe me, you will never see a jaguar like this in the cloud forests of Central America. You'll be lucky if you catch the tiniest glimpse of a tail heading into the forest ahead of you. This was taken at a zoo by somebody else. That's the only way you can get photos like this. But just the fact that these forests are holding cats says, cats that are like this size, says a tremendous amount about their integrity and what good shape that they're in. Big cats, small toucans. This is one of my favorites that's up in the cloud forest. It's the emerald toucanet. Here again, a fruit eater. Also a nest robber. That long bill is perfect for reaching into birds' nests and including quetzal nests occasionally and taking eggs and chicks. And last but not least, a really exotic bird. Let me play this quick video and let you listen to it. This is the three-wattled bellbird. Well, as a friend of mine likes to say, this is the kind of bird that makes you realize you're not in Kansas anymore. Extraordinary birds, they are the soundtrack for the forest, for the cloud forest, and you hear them all the time. But back to quetzals, because in a lot of ways, the quetzals really reign supreme here. They are the birds that people come to see, and they are the easiest bird to see, one of the easiest birds to see in these forests. With the right guide at the right time of year in the right place, you can almost be guaranteed of getting good looks at quetzals and being able to see and hear them. As a result, there's a huge tourist trade that is built up around this quetzal. I like to think of them, I talk about them sometimes as the money bird. It may sound a little crass, but there's a lot of truth to this and a lot of benefits to this. This is a part of the world that needs all the help it can get. And if quetzals can bring that in the form of cash, all the better. This is a quetzal lodge in the highlands, central highlands of Costa Rica in the San Gerardo de Dota. It's one of the more famous ones. It's one of the posher ones. It's comfortable. It's a place you can go, be in comfort, get good food, and see plenty of quetzals. And the quetzal is not just for the for the elite bird watchers. Here, this is the sign in the small village that I outside the small village as you drive where I live here in around San Vito. This is a billboard, if you will, that greets you as you drive into the town. Quetzals are at least 20 or 30 miles away. They don't live here, but even so, the people are extremely proud of being in an area where quetzals are still found. Birders make up a big part of the tourists who are coming to Costa Rica. 300,000 plus birders a year are coming here, and they're bringing a lot with them. They're bringing interest in quetzals, and they're bringing cash. If we look at one area here in Costa Rica in the northern highlands, an area called Monteverde, some of you may know it. It's very much on the tourist trail. A lot of people visit every year. There, a private reserve has been set up. At least 10 or 15,000 hectares and growing all the time. And quetzals are a big part of the draw. Over 50,000 tourists come through Monteverde every year, even more now. 28 lodges, 8 restaurants, craft shops, a lot of jobs, 400 quetzals. Back of the envelope calculation tells you that the amount of money these people are bringing in translates to about $10,000 to $15,000 per quetzal per year. These are birds that are paying their way. They are really bringing a lot into the community. They're a huge draw, and it shows you the power these birds have to generate interest and to reach out to the imagination of birders who are coming through and to lure them in. There's been some spin-offs from this program that are extremely interesting and hold great promise for other parts of the range where quetzals are found. This is a farm that is at slightly lower elevation than the reserve, the park, where quetzals are safe and never have to worry about any cutting. Here you see some of this land has been cut. It's a small farm, but on the left-hand side here, this tree is one of these aguacatillos, and it's owned by a farmer who has signed up with a program that is a collaboration between a Quetzal, one of the eco lodges in this part of the world, a conservation group, an NGO that's doing terrific work in the highlands here, the Costa Rica Wildlife Foundation, and a group of local farmers. And they are encouraged, they're given guidance, and they're encouraged to keep the fruit trees that the Quetzals live on, to cut as little of the forest as they can, just enough to open up for their farming. And it's been an extraordinarily successful program, really a model program. Here's one of the guys who is part of it. You can see he's proudly wearing his Quetzal T-shirt here, and he's showing off one of the larger aguacatillos that the Quetzals are coming in for. I visited his farm, met him, and absolute charmer, and he is doing terrific work. He is so proud of having the Quetzals on his farm and having people come and visit to see them. Not only that, last but not least, he has doubled his income by having tourists come to his farm, his annual income. These are farms that might make the owner $1,000 or $2,000 a year max. So he's been able to double that by becoming part of the Quetzal program. Here he is showing off some of the tail feathers that the birds have shed and left behind on his farm. And the other part of this program are nest boxes, like the ospreys we have around Southeast Massachusetts that respond so well to artificial nests. Quetzal populations can be boosted in areas where they don't have adequate dead trees for nesting in by building just the right kind of nesting boxes. It's fussy, it's hard to get them to use them, but with enough time and the right people, you can get them to do it. So the key here is that it involves not just a few people, but entire communities. So entire communities are being empowered by this enhanced Quetzal tourism. Quetzals are doing better than ever in this area. These people have an extra income stream, and it's a win-win, and as I say, a model for many other parts of the world. One of the key influences on Quetzal habitat are cattle. This is a really typical landscape at slightly lower elevations than those parklands I was showing you early on. It's a mix of woodlands, cleared woodlands that have been turned into pasture, a herd of maybe 20 or 30 cattle. It's low maintenance farming for the people who are here. The cattle are not moved around very much. They graze on the same pasture. It can have disastrous consequences in some places because they essentially just chew it down to the bone, and erosion sets in a big way. But oftentimes their cattle are kept at a low enough numbers so that they don't have that kind of disastrous impact. But all too often they do. The question is, how can Quetzals be integrated into this landscape? It turns out, and it's really interesting, it turns out that they can live on the edges of habitat like this as long as they have some intact forest behind them. So they don't need 100% parkland to survive, particularly if they have dead trees that are left for nesting, and if they have the trees that are the aguacatillo trees that they need for food. They can do quite well here. So what's happening is that two things. First of all, people are creating corridors that lead them down out of these highland forests into areas which are sort of mini migrations that they do every fall. They come down, they run out of food in the highland forests, and they have to move down into these more scattered woodlands. And they can do it as long as they have some kind of a forested corridor to lead them along. They're not going to fly long distance over open land. They won't do that, but they will fly from forest to forest as long as they have trees to help lead them along. Coffee is the other big influence in these highland areas. It's one of the key agricultural products. Cattle and coffee as well as the small scale milk agriculture that we saw earlier are the three prongs of agriculture in this area. Cattle and coffee tend to be bigger operations. And here you'll see that we really are not in great Quetzal habitat. This is shade grown coffee, which is, as many of you know, helps a lot. It provides habitat for birds, but not for Quetzals. The food that they need is generally not here. The nesting sites that they need are not here. They're rarely seen in habitat like this. This is great habitat for our migratory birds that are coming down, our warblers and orioles and vireos and tanagers that come down in winter in this part of the world. So shade-grown coffee definitely has a role, but for Quetzals, it has not been a big win. It does provide critical dollars for people who are farming up in these areas. A cow is worth about $1,000, and a small coffee plantation will net anyone, say 2 or 3 acres might net you, if you're lucky, $3,000 to $5,000 a year, something like that. Coffee prices have been particularly low lately, so people have been doing less well than usual. But it requires a lot more work than cattle, but it's a good source of income. Costa Rica, as you might have gathered, is at the forefront in keeping land in forest and in Quetzals. I showed you that huge park that covers a lot of the southern parts of Costa Rica. This is just a quick time frame that'll run you through what's happened with forest cover in Costa Rica from the 1940s through 2010. Way back in the 40s and 50s, almost 3/4 of Costa Rica was forested. By the 1980s, that was down to 1/4. And that was a combination of factors, but particularly government policies that encouraged people to settle on land, even provided financial incentives for doing it. If the land was settled, people could take ownership after a certain number of years. And gradually, the government changed and they woke up to the fact that they were losing a lot of what they had. And so they reversed course in the 1990s and have been providing conservation easements and both carrots and sticks, financial and otherwise, to encourage people to start bringing forests back, to replant, to hold on to forest corridors, and to provide the kinds of forests that wildlife needs. The other critical thing about Costa Rica, of course, is that it has one of the most extraordinary concentrations of parkland in Central America. Almost 20% of Costa Rica is now parkland, and this happened, most of it during the 1980s, when the government was realizing that it had a gold mine here in terms of biodiversity, in terms of a draw for tourism, and simply unethical reasons for holding on to what was here. This is the beginning, as many of you know, of the environmental movement. There was a huge turnaround in Costa Rica, and it became a poster child for how a country could boost wildlife and boost tourism at the same time. And there's a good reason Costa Rica is able to do this. Unlike many of the countries in Central America, it's a stable democracy. It has extraordinarily high levels of literacy. Even the smallest villages in the highlands of Costa Rica will have a school built up there by the government, a really nice school, everything well laid out, school buses to bring people in. They are a model for how to educate your citizenship. Most importantly, very importantly, women in Costa Rica have a big role. They tend to own businesses. They have small families, and they have an outsized role here in these communities. A thriving middle class that goes along with this, and as a result, a very strong conservation ethic, particularly beginning in the 80s and 90s. It's certainly not 100%. There's still parts of the country that are having some difficulties, but compared to most of the rest of Central America, compared to most of the rest of the world, Costa Rica is a beacon in the dark. We're moving on to other countries here. Let's take a look at Guatemala. Very different, at least in some ways, and similar in some others. The quetzal is really the national bird of Guatemala. Their currency is the quetzales. And here you see a male quetzal flying across a 10 quetzales bill. And they are a big part of the culture here. But Guatemala has none of the has a lot of the none of the pluses that you just saw for Costa Rica. It is much lower levels of literacy, much larger families, much more pressure on land. And so as a result, you run into far more likely to run into plots like this in the highlands that are being cut over for farming, particularly for cattle and for milpa agriculture. If we move a little bit farther north, we can see how drastic this can get. This is for Chiapas, the northernmost quetzals in Central America, and the north, and a cloud forest that has really been under siege. Chiapas has lost 80% of its cloud forest between 1970 and 2000. And if we project out beyond 2000 to 2050, given current trends, given current rates of cutting in the highlands, you can see that there's almost nothing left. The two areas that are left are protected here in the Sierra Madre in western Chiapas, southwestern Chiapas. There are two protected parks there where that are big enough to at least give quetzals a little bit of a respite over the next 50 years. But even here, there are issues with illegal farming in the parks and lack of adequate patrolling. Here it is. This is really, in some ways, this is the most important slide I'm going to show you. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is highland Guatemala, but it could be highland Mexico. It could be Honduras. It could be so many other areas. The good news here is that you've got a lot of conservation groups and government organizations that are working hard to empower these people to change their farming practices so that they have less cutting and more planting, keeping more of the forest in the areas where they're living so that wildlife has more of a chance. One of the ways to do this, of course, is to provide trees that they might not have access to. Another way is to provide education and family planning. But these are cultures, these are mostly Kichi Maya, and these are cultures that tend to have very large families. 8 to 10 children is not unusual. And when you do the math on 8 to 10 children every generation, it is quite alarming. You realize that population doubling times are every 15 years. So think about it. If your neighborhood was doubling in population every 15 years, you would have a very different neighborhood in 30 or 45 or 60 years than you have now. So that's what we're up against in the highlands. And there are a lot of questions here that I don't have answers to. I don't know what these kids are going to do in the next generation. Do they have a way out of this part of the world? Do they have a chance to live a life elsewhere, or do they have to live on ever dwindling resources as these highland forests, the way you saw in Chiapas, as these highland forests are whittled away to next to nothing at all. And it's the highland forests that have gone last. They were the least accessible, and they were out of reach for a long time. They no longer are. There are roads cut up in there. So that lowland people who are looking for land, for new land, the highlands are where they go. So there's, as I said, good news and bad news. The good news is that there's a lot of reforestation happening in these areas. Hopefully it can make a big dent in the diets and the lives of these people. One of the things that these studies have shown that is with new crops coming in, that the diets of these highland settlements improve dramatically. So for every five or six new species that come in and can be planted, there's another 2 or 3 that go on on the table at lunch and dinner. There you have it. I think I've gone too long. Again, my humble apologies for the glitches there early on. I hope this has helped make up for it. Be more than happy to answer questions. I think the take home here is that we have a species that is too valuable to lose. It's too valuable to lose not only because it has a tremendous draw for people. It can shine a light on forests that need to be saved, and it can bring attention to areas from people all over the world. It can bring attention to areas that that might otherwise escape and simply be cut down without us knowing about them. I think there's another reason to bring this bird front and center, and that is because not so much an economic reason, but simply because it's a reminder that we live in a world with dazzling birds. And isn't it wonderful that we can continue to be dazzled by birds as exotic as the resplendent quetzal? We're looking here at the evolution of beauty, 1 million years or more of evolution that has produced a bird that looks like this. Surely we need to hang on to enough cloud forests so that children and grandchildren, our children and grandchildren can continue to see them, and so can those people who are farming in the highlands of Guatemala and Honduras. They need them just as much or more than we do. Thanks. Anybody who needs more info, here's the short route into my project. Some of you have been very generous in helping to carry it along. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. So we do have some questions for you. Our first one, let me get all the way back up to the top of our questions. You had mentioned one of the national forests that you were in for your research. Could you just share the name of that one more time?
Oh, I'm staying at a research station that is part of the Organization for Tropical Studies, OTS, and it's the Las Cruces Research Station. It's down right near the Panama border in the mid elevations. We're at about 4,500 feet. The quetzals I study, I go up in about another 2,000 to 3,000 feet. It's another hour. It's an hour's drive up perilous back roads, but once you get there they are.
Perfect. Thank you. That was from Channing Dawson. Our next question is from Candace Cornell. Candace asks, do predators follow the brilliant males back to their nests?
I wish we knew, Candace. There's a lot we don't know about predation around quetzal gatherings and nests. The bottom line is they don't seem to get nailed very much. The nests do. Tropical birds tend to lose a lot of eggs and young. That's just typical for nests down here. But the quetzals themselves, there's very little evidence that they're getting nailed very much by predators. What's extraordinary about these birds is they look, if they're sitting in the sun, they're absolutely dazzling. But once it's raining a little bit and they disappear into the canopy of a tree, they blend in surprisingly well.
Perfect. Our next question is from, oh, I just lost my track. It's from Don. Don, I'm sorry if I say the last name wrong, Don Reep. What was the name of the lodge, the eco lodge that you shared the slide of?
Oh, that is, hang on. There are two main quetzal lodges in the highlands. One is Paraíso Quetzal, and the other is, of course, it's going to slip my mind. Give me 2 minutes and I'll get back to you on it. It is, it is Sevegre, Sevegre, Sevegre.
Perfect. Thank you. And Parson would like to know, how many young do a pair have, and how is the population doing in respect to numbers?
Yeah, good question. It depends on, as you saw, the Chiapas population is doing terribly. When you lose that much cloud forest, you end up with only a few hundred quetzals left in Mexico. In Costa Rica, the populations are stable and doing very well, particularly in the large national parks. Quetzals have only laid, they lay 2 eggs, raise 2 young. and but they breed twice a year, so that the female, once the young are close to fledging, the female takes off and leaves this gaudy male behind for all the childcare in the last month, in the month of raising. Again, here's a bird that you wouldn't expect to have that kind of, to be doing that kind of raising of young, being that kind of a mate, but indeed they do. So the female often takes off and breeds again, and the male is left behind taking care of the first brood.
All right. And I mean, overall, that population was, you just said, decreasing a little bit. So that answers the second part. Leslie Knowles would like to know, does the Quetzal have any natural predators or any diseases that is impacting numbers?
No diseases that we know of that are impacting numbers. And again, as I mentioned, predation is very few and far between. The numbers in Costa Rica are really robust, particularly in the national parks and along the edges of the national parks. For instance, I was up in the Quetzal Mountains near here 2 days ago, and I saw at least 25 Quetzals in 2 to 3 hours, and my guide and I found four active nests, and that was really without a whole lot of effort.
Thank you. Next question comes from Victor Mealy. Do they always migrate down, or is this new? This was during the slide where you're talking about the corridors.
Yeah, good question. They and again, not all of them migrate. It's still not well understood, but it is known that most of them, the vast majority of them, leave for at least 2 or 3 months every year. And they tend to move downslope because that's where they're more likely to be able to find the food that they need. They don't move far. What happens is, even if they're only moving maybe 3 to 5 miles, the drop in elevation is enough so that they're moving into a totally different kind of forest. It looks the same, but the species that are there are very different. And because they're different species, they tend to have different fruiting schedules, and the birds are more likely to be able to find food there. Of course, once they're in the lowlands, they need to get back to their highland forest. They're going to migrate upslope again. And there's even evidence that some of them will move downslope for part of the time, cross over the top of the mountains and go down on the Caribbean slope and then come back. So they're vagrants. They're moving around.
Perfect. Victor had another question: do the percentages of forested land include the shade coffee plantations?
No, I don't think they do.
Okay. All right. Our next question from Mead Benhammer says, wouldn't you agree that the protection of the lands and the provision of wild highlands for Quetzals is inversely related to the degree of U.S. influence on Central American governments and policies? They provide the example of CIA's influence in Guatemala has dramatically influenced the modern day politics and economy, causing the environmental degradation. So how does the U.S. bridge that gap?
Absolutely. Well, we're into politics, and that always gets very sticky. let me first back up and say one of the reasons Quetzals are doing and highland forest is doing so well in Costa Rica is because that the government has not been influenced, has not had U.S. meddling that the other countries have had. Absolutely, that's a very on target comment, and it's really too complicated to get into in detail tonight, but the bottom line is access to land is key in these countries, particularly in Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. And land tends to be held very few people have access, not enough people have access to land. And it's a complicated procedure to be able to get land. And so that's why you find these highland parcels that are continually divided up into smaller and smaller pieces.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor Robinson asks, is the feather trade a concern for the species?
The feather trade. Thank you, Eleanor. Yes, well, the feather trade is the fascinating part of the feather trade is the Aztecs and the Mayans. And they may actually have almost eliminated quetzals in the period when they were doing that 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. Theoretically, they weren't killing the quetzals. They were not allowed. It was a sacred bird. You were not allowed to kill the bird. So they were either trapped or shot with blowguns, stunned, and the tail feathers of the males pulled and then carried back long distances to the Mexicans. Today, it's much less of an issue. In fact, it's really not much of an issue at all. In parts of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, yes, it probably happens. Probably in Nicaragua as well. We have no idea what's going on with quetzals in Nicaragua. There's a lot of Central America that's kind of off limits and hard to get to. So it's a tough question to answer, but the bottom line is when you're seeing 20 and 30 quetzals in 3 hours, the feather trade is probably not a significant impact, at least on the populations that you're seeing.
Right. Our next question is from Kat Bradley Bennett. She says, "Greetings, Alan. It's Kat. Could you share how people can get involved from the U.S. and preservation efforts in Costa Rica?"
Yeah, I think the Costa Rican Wildlife Foundation is doing a terrific job in the highlands in the San Gerardo de Dota. Conservation dollars go a long way there. I can't recommend them highly enough. Lots of groups working in Chiapas and in Guatemala. If you just go online and Google quetzals and highland forests, you'll quickly get on to the groups that are doing a lot of the work. They're both government groups and nonprofit organization conservation groups. I think I'm particularly admiring the groups that are working with farmers to diversify crops and to work on keeping land from eroding. Those people are doing terrific jobs. So easy enough to find those people. They're quite present on the web.
All right. Jeanette Dumas asked the approximate population numbers of quetzals and how they've changed in the last 50 to 100 years. I know that you had a couple slides that showed how those numbers have changed a little bit. I don't know if you can do a quick.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the reason I didn't bring that up is because we don't really have an answer. We have an answer for Chiapas because there was a Mexican biologist who did terrific work there for a decade. And so she was able to document what the populations there were. In Mexico, we're probably down to a few hundred quetzals. In Guatemala, we really have no idea. What we do know in Guatemala is there's a huge national park in the northeastern, southeastern section of Guatemala that has probably 100,000 hectares of cloud forest. If you figure there are maybe 1 or 2 pairs per hectare of cloud forest, quick back of the envelope calculation would say there are at least a couple of 100,000 pairs of quetzals in Sierra de las Minas. But honestly, we don't know. Even in Costa Rica, we know how many quetzals are in Monteverde because it's a small reserve and it's well studied. There are probably 400 pairs in the 10 to 12,000 hectares that are there. But the rest of them, you really have to guess. Bottom line, they're probably somewhere between 50 and 100,000 pairs of resplendent, probably a couple of 100,000 pairs of resplendent quetzals left in the area, in the intact cloud forests that are left for them. And that's conservative, probably a lot more.
Okay. Next question is from Sofriona. Sorry, I said that wrong. Sophronia, there we go. Sophronia Camp. The photos in the slides, were those yours or taken from elsewhere?
Oh, good Lord, no. All stolen off the web, Sophronia. What do you expect?
All right. Let's see. John Ballard would like to know, with the population increasing, decreasing, what impact does climate change have?
Yeah, good question. These birds probably are somewhat vulnerable to climate change, although not right away. Hard to know. Because they live in a particular band of elevations, a band of forest. As climate changes, it's quite likely that those forests are going to the lower elevations of those forests are going to become drier, and the quetzals are going to have to move farther up. On the other hand, they aren't now at the very high elevations. So if those forests change into the cloud forests that are that work for quetzals, then they may have a little bit of a buffer zone. A real crystal ball. That's a tough one to answer.
Right. Our next question is another one from Sophronia. What was the adjustment like going from ospreys to quetzals?
Oh, they're both rock star birds. It was very easy. And they're the rock star bird at the two ends of my life. So when I'm home, I'm with the ospreys, and when I'm down here, quetzals are the bird you most want to see. Quetzals lead very different lives, so it's been fascinating to me to transition into really a totally new bird, and one that I knew nothing about. The whole fruit eating aspects, a bird that lives entirely on fruit, is fascinating because it's hard to live on fruit. You couldn't live on fruit. I couldn't, none of us could live on fruit. You need protein. And by the way, when the quetzals are feeding are raising young, they're feeding them mostly insects and frogs, because you can't grow young on raspberries and avocados.
Something we share in common. I try to eat fruit, but I just like pizza too much. It happens. All right. Our next question is from Arcelia Dorenzo. Where in Costa Rica is the CAPEC organization located? And do you know if they have a social media page?
They sure do. And that's the Costa Rica Wildlife Foundation that I mentioned. They're terrific. Look them up.
Perfect. Rachel Mulray says, slash and burn practices among indigenous societies around the world have been utilized for time immemorial in many cases. Forest management practices are clearly evident in the archaeological record in the Western Hemisphere, and the U.S. has in recent history destabilized parts of the Central American region, resulting in banana republics. Compared to traditional slash and burn methods of forestry, these industrial influences appear to have more impact on the biodiversity. Could you possibly provide a little more insight into how those practices change the biodiversity?
Well, two things. First of all, the biodiversity is extraordinarily high in these forests on a level that we can barely begin to appreciate from our forests at home. For instance, just in the fruits that the quetzals are eating, there are something like 80 to 100 species of those avocados that are growing just in the forests of Costa Rica alone. But yes, I mean, really, the problem with the indigenous folks are terrific at taking care of the land that they do, and are trying their hardest. The central problem for those communities is simply population pressure. When your population is doubling every 15 years, you're just not in a sustainable mode. You can no longer feed your family on the land that you have without clearing more. And even if you put it off for 30 years, 60 years, 100 years, I mean, just run those numbers out 200 years and see where you are.
All right. I have a couple of repeat questions about how many eggs they lay a year. So the Whaling Museum will be releasing a recording of this in a couple of weeks once it's all edited, and we can see the answers to those questions again. So in effort of time, we're gonna go on to our next question. David Jeffrey says, are you working on a book about quetzals?
I am working on a book of quetzals. Yes, I am. I am indeed. And I've been at it for a couple of years, and I have another 6 months to get it done. It'll be published in Costa Rica. I am pleased to say there will be a Spanish language translation, and it will have a lot of fabulous pictures in it.
Very nice. Another one from Sophronia, asking on behalf of Jeff if you've caught any trout.
No, I haven't. I've been too busy chasing quetzals, Jeff.
Candace Cornell would like to know, is the coloration on the feathers, is that from the structure or pigment or iridescence or a combination?
a combination. The wing coverts that you see, those long feathers that come down over the tops of the wings, as well as the tail feathers, as well as the crest, those are iridescent colors. So you get it; they will change color in the light. So the tail, when you see it, could be powder blue, it could be green, it could be it could even have a little bit of a gold tinge to it sometimes. The breast color and a lot of the rest of the color, those tend to, the breast color is definitely pigment. The back color is structural and iridescent.
Okay. We have a couple questions that have already been answered, but we can briefly just go over them again. So David Cole asked if quetzals are monogamous.
Yes, they are, surprisingly so. As David well knows, when you have a bird that is this sexy, it's rare that it's a monogamous bird. But quetzals, because there's a challenge in raising young in these highland forests, the climate is a real challenge, and it takes two parents. The bottom line is it simply takes two parents to raise quetzal young. That's what it comes down to.
All right. Jeanette Dumas wants to know, what do they feed their young? Mainly insects?
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, but it's a mix of fruit. They certainly are bringing some fruit, but it's at least 50% either insects or amphibians or reptiles. They'll bring lizards, they'll bring frogs, they'll bring insects. They're much less good at catching those. It takes them longer to catch an insect than it does to get a piece of fruit. So you can see that they rarely are getting anything but fruit when they're just feeding themselves. But in order to power the growth of young, which takes a lot of protein, you've got to be able to get insects and other animals.
Thank you. Sarah Cunningham asks, is poaching an issue?
Yeah, good question. Again, we really don't know. That's a very hard one to answer. It doesn't, according to the people who know, who spend more time in quetzal forests than I do, it looks that at least it certainly isn't a problem in Costa Rica, or if it is, it's a minor problem. In places like Guatemala and Mexico, it could be much more of a problem. It probably is. But again, when you have a park in Guatemala like Sierra de las Minas, which has 100,000 hectares of cloud forest, poaching could be a bit of an influence, but it's probably not making a big dent in a population that's that big.
All right. Rick H asks, any efforts to relocate the species to a similar habitat in South America?
No, and I don't think we'd want to do that. First of all, there are already other quetzals in South America, and there's no reason to expect that the resplendent quetzal would be able to make that adjustment at all, particularly with the other quetzals that are there. So there are 4 other species in South America, 3 in the Andes and 1 down in the Amazon. So no, there wouldn't be any reason to do that at all. Perhaps one could think about translocating quetzals back to Mexico if the situation there ever stabilizes and some of those forests begin to come back. But at the moment, those forests have all the quetzals that they can handle.
All right. Paula Fletcher would like to know, is there a winter season in Costa Rica, and do the quetzal move with temperature change?
Not so much temperature change. It's all driven by food. So they run out of food at the end of the breeding season, not because they've eaten it all, but just because the trees that provide it are no longer fruiting. And so they have to move down to areas where the fruits are more available. There's not a lot of temperature change seasonally in Costa Rica at all. The big change here is in rainfall. So you have a dry season, and especially October, November, you get massive rains especially in the highlands of Costa Rica.
All right. We've got a few more questions. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. We're just going to end here in about 3 minutes or so. So we'll try to go through,
Sure,
make sure we get ones that we haven't asked yet. So Paula Fletcher asks again, are there any other varieties of quetzal in addition to the splendid quetzal?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there are 4 species in South America, 2 that live in the Andes, well, 3 actually that live in the Andes. One very far north in the Andes in Colombia and Venezuela, the others down through Ecuador and Peru. And then there is an Amazonian species that has a very broad range through Amazonian forests, the Pavonine quetzal. And there's sort of a semi-quetzal that lives in northern mountains of Mexico and even into Arizona. It's called the eared quetzal. It's honestly more of a trogon than it is a quetzal, but it is not even in the same genus, but it is considered a quetzal.
Right. We actually had a question about the family of trogons. I don't know if we're gonna have time to delve into that one. So let's wrap up. We'll do one last question here. Let's see, who named, a good one from Jeanette Dumas, who named the Resplendent Quetzal?
Gee, that's a great question, and I should know the answer. And it probably would have. I don't know the answer. I'm embarrassed to say exactly, but it would have been named in the 1830s and 40s, probably by European ornithologists when it was shipped over to there. I'm showing my ignorance here. I hope somebody will. I'm probably terribly wrong, but
Hey, we threw you on the spot. You're okay.
I will know the answer in another 24 hours. So
Alan, you have been resplendent.
thank you.
Terrific. What a great introduction to a beautiful bird for a lot of us. I wanted to ask you, would you mind sharing your email address for other questions?
Sure. My email address for other questions is A as in Apple, F as in Frank, P as in Poole, AFP7. That's my initials, AFP7 at Cornell.edu.
Also, I think a lot of us want to support this bird with tourist dollars. Are there many ways of figuring out a trip down there, and people can Google that? Or
Absolutely. As I mentioned, there are these wonderful Quetzal lodges, at least in Costa Rica. There are also many in Guatemala. So, and again, that's all information, all very available on the web. And even in Honduras, there are 2 or 3 that are getting going that are also working to involve communities in the whole effort. Costa Rica is certainly the easiest and the hotspot for Quetzal tourism right now. Guatemala is not to be overlooked. And we're hoping on down the line that other countries like Mexico and Honduras can begin to learn from the model that Costa Rica has provided and begin to bring a stream of tourist dollars into these cloud forests that need as much help as they do.
can't thank you enough. This has really been an exceptional talk, Alan. You're coming back pretty soon. I hope it's going to warm up for you up here.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank Nathan for his excellent moderating, and also Jocelyn again in the Whaling Museum. We have our next one is April 6th. And on that Science Cafe, we have a fish biologist talking about herring counts. Really an exceptional guy. His name is Brad Chase. He's a fish biologist with the Mass Division of Marine Fisheries. And he sort of counts all the herring in all the streams and rivers and has a great story for us. So Alan, thank you again. Come back soon, and I'll cheer you in person.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, everybody, so much for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.